Of course, Gary Lineker says that he continues to tweet so he can look himself in the mirror at night. That's in spite of BBC impartiality rules.
Yes, speaking at the Hay Festival, the Match of the Day presenter said that expressing his opinions publicly felt vital to him. He sparked debate over whether he should be allowed to remain a BBC presenter because of his political social media posts.
So, has Gary Lineker gone too far? Delighted to be joined now by political commentator Joe Phillips, who thinks he should be allowed to tweet and stay at the BBC, and the former BBC presenter Danny Kelly, who thinks he absolutely shouldn't. OK, Danny, let's start with you. What's your case?
Listen, I love Gary Lineker, the footballer. He played for Everton. He scored 40 goals in one season, but I don't like Gary Lineker, the political activist. And Gary Lineker at the Hay Festival said how much he loves the BBC. Well, I can tell you, Lineker, the BBC, it's not reciprocal. When I was at the BBC, plenty of people at the coalface, the shop floor, in the newsroom were very wary of what was coming next out of Gary Lineker's Twitter feed, because Lineker's a multimillionaire. He's doing more damage to the future of the licence fee than any potential organisation trying to defund the licence fee. I wish he'd rein it in. I wish he'd think of the 18,000 people whose jobs and livelihoods depend on the licence fee. And I'm pro-BBC licence, even though they ditched me for being a 50-year-old white guy 3 years ago. For diversity's sake, I'm still a big fan of the licence fee. I'm not calling for it to be scrapped, but Lineker's doing more harm to it than anyone can imagine. He simply doesn't care.
I mean, Joe Phillips, Danny makes a good point there. It's not fair to the other staff, and it could be actually putting that licence fee at risk, putting the future of the BBC at risk.
I'd say that's absolute cobblers, frankly, Emily. I don't think it's putting the licence fee at risk at all. And don't forget, if you put this in context, Gary Lineker was talking at the Hay Festival this week, and he was talking about the tweets and what led to his suspension from broadcasting a year ago. He wasn't tweeting today. He talked about why he goes on social media. I mean, I don't, but other people do, and I'm sure people do it for the same reasons that Gary Lineker does. He's entitled to his opinion. He's a sports presenter. He's not a news presenter. If you don't like what he says, that's fine. If you like what he says about football and his commentary, that's fine too. But the idea that this is putting people's jobs or the BBC at risk is absolute nonsense. What is actually there is somebody who is an intelligent, articulate person who's got opinions. He's not offensive. And the point he made at Hay was that he was sorry that the BBC ended up as a row between him and the BBC, instead of the BBC and the Daily Mail, which of course sparked the whole thing by taking his comments out of context. So I think, let's be honest, let's be fair. You call yourselves a free speech station. He's not saying anything derogatory or defamatory.
Well, let's throw that back to Danny Kelly. Then this is just about free speech. The guy's a sports presenter.
Yeah, well, she's right. This lady is right. It's about free speech and he's allowed to do it. But what isn't cobblers is how BBC staff feel about Lineker. And whether the lady thinks that it's nonsense that Gary Lineker is somehow single-handedly going to destroy the future of the licence fee, if you were to go out on the streets and ask people about how they feel about the BBC and opponents and critics of the funding model, and then you ask them to extrapolate, I guarantee you Lineker would come up in the top three. And the second one might be about political or perceived political bias. And the third one might be about the cost. So it might be cobblers to this lady, but it's not cobblers to the vast majority, I would think.
Joe, isn't there a point that, junior members of staff wouldn't be able to get away with what Gary's tweeted over the years?
Well, first of all, hello, Danny. My name's Joe.
Yes, Joe Phillips.
Let's say hello. Let's not refer to that lady or she. I don't think it's right for you to make. I don't think it's right for you to make allegations about how staff might feel about Gary Lineker without him being able to defend himself.
Joe. I've worked at the BBC for 18 years.
Have I. But I'm just saying that I don't think you should make claims about how other people might feel about Gary Lineker when he is not here to defend himself. And it is quite clear that there are guidelines that the BBC has drawn up. And in fact, Gary Lineker was involved in the redrafting of the guidelines on social media.
That's quite a special privilege, though, isn't it? That's quite a special privilege.
Yeah. What have I said, Joe, that would need Gary Lineker to defend himself? What have I said? Have I defamed him? Have I cast spurious allegations. All I've said is that he's
I think
unpopular
your
at the
suggestion,
BBC.
the inference is that people within the BBC don't like what Gary Lineker does, but they're too frightened to say anything. Okay.
I haven't said anything about being frightened. When did I say that? You put words in my mouth. All I'm doing is saying that in my 18 years of experience, when Lineker was on Twitter, a lot of people were worried about what he was going to say next. Now, what have I done that Lineker needs to defend?
Well, what were they worried about? The inference was that they were worried about their jobs and their future because you said he was threatening the BBC.
Oh, I think Danny might not be able to hear you anymore. But Joe, we've heard both sides of the debate. Thank you very much indeed. And yes,
Okay.
Joe Phillips, not this lady, and of course Danny Kelly there, both who have worked at the BBC. So it's good to get those two perspectives from people who have been inside the institution itself.